This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Welcome in, everybody, to a special edition of the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Always, I enjoy a chance to talk to Steve Dace. He's on the line. He messaged me and reached out and was like, I want to talk about the draft. There's this great draft program that Adam talked to me about yesterday. He was like, you know what? There's this great draft program that I fiddle with that is really interactive and fun. So, I want to welcome in Steve Dace. Tell everybody about this program and what we're about to do here on this special edition of the podcast.
You bet, man. So the Draft Network is a really cool site that covers the NFL draft. And it's kind of it kind of does a little bit of both of what a Pro Football Focus and a Mel Kiper or a Todd McShay or a Daniel Jeremiah do. So it's got a little bit of both. And one of the cool things that allows you to do on there is it's got all of the draft eligible players in a database, and you can do a mock draft all 7 rounds like we're about to do for the Detroit Lions. And you can do like every team's draft or just draft your team or a group of teams against the computer who, based on the current salary cap situation, the latest roster, the needs that are considered the primary needs for each team, it will then draft the rest of the teams. And it's a ton of fun. If you set it to fast mode, it goes through the picks in between your team really fast. And it's the good thing about it too is, teams will start doing a lot of mock drafts. And the reason why they'll do those is they're trying to, based off of where the rest of the team's needs are, what their history, their tendencies are, what players are likely to be there, what positions do they think they maybe need to make a run on earlier than others, what positions do they think they can wait on. And so I've literally done like 10 Lions drafts on this. So I've got a pretty good idea of what positions, as we get into this draft, that we may think, hey, that's a major need we need to fill. And we might want to do it even now with a guy who may not be ranked as high because there's going to be a run on that position based on the tendencies of the algorithm as I've gone through it. So it should be a ton of fun.
Exactly. And it's called the Draft Network. And how can someone that's listening to this get this application or this program?
TheDraftNetwork.com. Make sure the is in there. TheDraftNetwork.com. And if you just click on the mock draft thing on the top of the page, it'll show you, take you to the link where you can click on this and determine the settings. If you want to watch the computer simulate an entire draft, or if you want to do it manually so you control one team or a group of teams, you can do that as well. So I think it's a blast. And if you do the fast mode and you know what you're doing, I mean, I can go through an entire 7-round mock draft of the Lions in about 10 or 15 minutes. Now, we'll take a little bit longer than that as you and I discuss and debate what picks we're going to make. We got a couple of ground rules. If we don't know any of these players, now I'm a draftnik. Like, I watch all the Senior Bowl practices. I'm really into it. So I know who a lot of these guys are, but we're not like, just going to pick a name because it's at the top of the board. So if it's somebody we don't have a legitimate opinion of, then we're not going to pick them. Deal?
Deal. I look forward to this, and let's get it going.
Welcome, football fans. Thank you all for being here, and for all of you tuning in across the country to welcome our future NFL stars.
All right, so we start the draft right now, and so it's going through the first 7 picks. Here are the first 7 picks in the draft. All right, Nick Bosa goes number 1 to the Cardinals. Josh Allen, number 2 to the 49ers. Quinnen Williams, number 3 to the Jets. Devin, because there's no trades, keep that in mind. Devin White goes number 4 to the Raiders. Rashawn Gary from Michigan goes 5th to the Buccaneers. Kyler Murray is the first quarterback taken at number 6. Juwan Taylor, the offensive lineman from Florida, goes number 7. All right, so based off of the Lions free agent acquisitions, the most immediate pressing needs, according to the Draft Network, are cornerback, tight end, edge, rusher, and interior offensive line, which Justin Rogers at the Detroit News listed as the Lions' number 1 need today. But right away, we've got a dilemma because Dwayne Haskins is still on the board. Now, if you look at the recent trend in the NFL, and you saw the Chiefs do this with Pat Mahomes, for example, but the reason that as you draft him, sit him a year with a veteran quarterback, and then when that guy's dead money doesn't hurt your cap as much, you move Alex Smith the next year. The recent trend in the NFL is go get a Carson Wentz, a Jared Goff, a Baker Mayfield, get that guy on a rookie contract so that your cap is freed up to then put a lot of weapons around him. And look at what the Browns have right now. Njoku, Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb, OBJ, Jarvis Landry, and they're still $50 million under the cap with Baker Mayfield. So we've got a decision to make. Do we ride it out here? And we got to decide, are we going to do this based on what we would do or we think the Lions are going to do? How do you want to do it?
Let's do it based on what we think the Lions are going to do.
All right. So do we think the Lions are ready to bank Dwayne Haskins now for a year to keep Stafford, or do we think they will fill another need? What do we think?
I think the Lions are going to fill another need because you don't go out there and sign Connor Cook. And I know that there's a certain level of a smokescreen that these general managers try to do so that they can maybe leverage the value of their pick. But I feel like with what the Lions have been doing, they've been pretty straightforward in that they identify needs, they look at what they're looking at, and they identify and they try and draft what is based on their needs. So for me, I like what Montez Sweat has been able to do. I think he fills a need. 6'6", 245-pound edge rusher from Mississippi State. So if he's there, I think the Lions might take a serious look at a guy like Montez Sweat.
I agree with you. And no, Montez Sweat, former Michigan State Spartan, by the way, is not I know he lit up the combine. This guy dominated in the SEC statistically 2 straight years. Go watch the bowl game when TJ Hawkinsmith at Iowa tried to block him in the Outback Bowl. He had no chance. I mean, one of the reasons why Iowa had no running game is TJ Hawkinsmith could not secure the edge against Montez Sweat. So what I love about picking Montez Sweat here is with Trey Flowers now, you can essentially say to Montez Sweat, your job this year is we're putting you in passing downs, and your job is just to go get the quarterback. That's your job. We don't need you to be an every down player yet. So I'm with you. I would make Montez Sweat the Lions pick here. We both agree on that. So we good?
We're good. We've drafted, baby. With the 8th pick, the Detroit Lions select Montez Sweat, and we're all happy.
So now we're watching. The computer is going through the rest of the first round. Now, something to think about as we get into round 2. One of the things I've noticed is that and this is I have the same dilemma here every time I come to this pick, that cornerbacks and interior offensive linemen, there's always a run on both of these positions in these 2 rounds. And so I always struggle with, can I get one of the guys I want at this position in round 3? And over the dozen or so times I've gone through this, it almost never works out. I almost always have to choose here to go either with the corner or the interior offensive line, or we could go off the board at another position. Some of the best players that are available right now, when you look at, if you want a young quarterback you didn't want to spend a first-round pick on, Drew Lock and Daniel Jones are still on the board right now. You look at Justin Lane is the top-rated quarterback right now, the former Michigan State Spartan, a guy with the kind of size that Matt Patricia likes. A wide receiver I love is Deebo Samuel at South Carolina, could play outside or in the slot, tore up the Senior Bowl. Paris Campbell, who was the fastest wide receiver at the NFL Combine, is still there. If you want to finally get the other tight end, the Lions have to get at some point. Irv Smith of Alabama is still here, but there's always plenty of off the tight ends that are available later in this draft. So I think we should decide whether we're going to look at the interior offensive line or whether we're going to look at corner. My vote would be we look at the interior offensive line here. But what do you think?
Oh, man, Steve, I think you and I put together a draft board pretty good. If I ever get the job, I might have to lob you a call because with my second round, I targeted, and you'll let me know if Chris Lindstrom is still available. He's an offensive guard, Boston College, 6'4", 310 pounds. His draft round projection is the second or third round. So if he's there, and it's been known that, TJ Lang was cut. So if he's there, Chris Lindstrom's my guy that I targeted with the second round pick. So I'm okay 43rd overall with Chris if you're okay with him.
Now, I would be. He's not on the board, but the number 2 interior offensive lineman, Elston Jenkins, who was really good at the Senior Bowl, is still on the board. I would vote for picking him.
Exactly. Let's do it.
All right. So with their second pick, number 65 overall, to go with Montez Sweat, because this also is the Bob Quinn. We know he likes to build teams from the inside out because that's how most really good NFL teams are built. So after going edge rusher with Montez Sweat from Mississippi State, the Lions, who we also know under Bob Quinn, love SEC players, go right back to the SEC and the same team. They pick back-to-back Mississippi State Bulldogs, Montez Sweat in the first round and Elgton Jenkins of Mississippi State to fill the hole of TJ Lang's departure in round number 2. So now we're going through now we're coming up to pick number 88 for the Lions. The number one glaring need that the Lions have yet to address is that cornerback. When you look at the best overall players that are still on the board, regardless of position, if you want a young quarterback, Daniel Jones of Duke is still there. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside of Stanford, who I think is like 7 feet tall, is still there. Pretty much all of the best running backs, other than Josh Jacobs of Alabama, are still there. Tyree Jackson, the giant quarterback at Buffalo, who's really come on late in the draft process, is still there. Some good interior defensive line depth. So if you're thinking we got to get the corner position fixed now, we need another corner. The top-rated player at that position right now is David Long at the University of Michigan, but he's also only rated the 127th overall selection on the board, and we are at pick 88. So what we got to decide here is whether or not this position is enough of a need that we take less value, because if we don't address it now, by the time this gets back to us later on, there may not be anybody there capable of helping us this year. So what's your read on it?
Yeah, exactly. I have David Long at that spot being drafted, but I also had as a backup, I looked at maybe going in terms of the offense, looking at Penny Hart from Georgia State, a 5'8", 180-pound wide receiver, really impressed at the combine, could also provide some competition there with Powell and Danny Amendola. I know that the Lions went out and signed Amendola as a security blanket, but I also agree with Bob Quinn in that there's always room for improvement in the draft for competition, and a guy like Penny Hart, if he's still available, is a guy I targeted as well. But I'm more than okay with looking at the defense and addressing the need at corner. So if David Long's available, I'm okay with taking him as a top-rated corner left, and that's available.
Penny Hart is available, but the depth at the wide receiver position is so much better than it is at corner in this juncture that I would vote for taking the best corner on the board in this juncture. So the Lions, with their third pick, will take from the University of Michigan with the 88th pick in the third round, they will take David Long. So if you're just tuning in so far, the Lions have addressed the 3 biggest needs on the team. Montez Sweat at the edge rusher. Now you're talking about one of the better defensive fronts in the NFL going into next year now. Elgton Jenkins, also from Mississippi State, he fills the hole left by TJ Lang, so they don't have to hope that Tyrell Crosby can convert from tackle to guard. They've got a pure guard to go there. And David Long, and if you know Pro Football Focus, the Pro Football Focus analytics love David Long. They kept saying over and over again, in terms of opponent's completion percentage, he was the best cornerback in college football last year. And one of the things I noticed as a Michigan fan when I watched the NFL scouting combine is when they did the corner drills, they had NFL Network had Deion Sanders on the field giving his take. He literally stopped the drill and went into the drill on camera live to point out to David Long he was the only guy in the entire allotment of corners who was doing the route correct, who was doing the drill correctly. So you like to see that when a Hall of Famer calls out your guy for doing it right. So now we get to the fourth round, pick 111. Now, this is where, because of what the Lions have done in free agency and because of what we've done the first 3 rounds of the draft, now's when it gets fun. You can play a little bit now. Now you can start looking at who are just some of the best players still available. We've addressed all of our immediate needs. And Jesse James, we have the inline blocker, tight end, so we still kind of probably need a movement style of tight end. But we've addressed the edge. Our defensive line is set. We've got our nickel back. We've got another guy at corner. We're pretty set at safety, even with the retirement of Glover Quinn, with the 3 guys we have there. So now we could just start looking at what Bob Quinn said the Lions really also needed, playmakers. We could look at running back. We could look at wide receiver. You mentioned a guy at Georgia State that was a slot that you really like. We could start looking to see who are the top movement tight ends available. For those that are wondering, what do I mean by a movement tight end? I mean a guy that is going to be a little bit more comfortable. Well, let me put it this way. An Eric Ebron, except one that catches the ball. That's what I mean by a movement tight end, a guy that actually can get down the field. So if you look at tight end, the tight end that I think is perfect for the Lions system, I love Foster Moreau of LSU, but he can play inline as well. Caleb Wilson at UCLA was one of the fastest tight ends at the combine, a very high production guy. He would be your pure movement tight end. If you're looking at wide receiver, the guy you love from Georgia State is still on the board. Stanley Morgan at Nebraska is still on the board. There's a lot of depth here at receiver. For example, we're sitting here with the 111th pick. Overall at receiver, players 109, 112, 115, 116, 120, 121, 124. So guys that would be picked around here, a lot of them from the same position are still on the board, which shows you that teams also kept pushing receivers down the draft because they had a lot of depth there. If you're thinking young quarterback, Will Grier of West Virginia is actually still on the board. So this is where we've got a luxury now, brother. We can kind of play around a little bit. Where do you want to go?
Yeah, as a side note, on the Draft Network, does it allow you also just to type in a quick name and see where they went? Because just looking at cornerbacks as well, if the Lions in the previous round don't get the guy that they want, I also was targeting Savion Smith, and I wondered what his value was looked at in the draft. 6'1", 200-pound corner from Alabama. So where did he go? Is he off the board?
He is still on the board. In fact, in several of these mock drafts, when I've waited until the end to take, because I've gone through every conceivable scenario. Like, if the Lions took a quarterback, what would happen? What would it look like? In several of these drafts, I was able to get Savion Smith of Alabama in the 6th or 7th round.
Nice.
So he is still on the board.
Nice. His draft round projection is in the 2nd to 4th round currently, so that's pretty good. That's good. No, but in terms of what you've talked about, I like the speed. I'm a guy that says, you know what, in terms of what struggles did the Detroit Lions have last season and what started to happen late in the season when the offense struggled, I think they dipped way down in the rankings in terms of separation. And these stats don't lie. If you don't separate, that's when Stafford gets killed. So give me the fastest tight end from UCLA, and I'll be very happy.
All right, so let me find him. That would be Caleb Wilson, the tight end from UCLA, is who we're going to pick here as our movement tight end. And that's the Lions' 111th pick in round number 4. So now it's official. We have addressed every glaring issue between free agency and the draft. The Lions have addressed every single one of those issues. Now, I still think they have some holes or some needs more than holes.
Yes.
I think we could use another backup quarterback, a young quarterback to develop, a running back to give you insurance for Kerryon Johnson, even though, of course, you've got the Zach man there who's kind of has a cult following. I think you could definitely use more depth at wide receiver as well. So when you start looking at who are the best overall players that are still on the board at this point, wide receivers and running backs are galore.
Yes.
I'm fine if you want to go with the guy from Georgia State that you were looking at, Penny Hart, if you want to make that play now. Now, looking where he's ranked, though, I think he'll be there a little bit later in the draft if you want to go somewhere else. But if you want to make the play, because one of the rules of drafting, whether it's fantasy football or regular football, is if he's your sleeper, chances are he's somebody else's as well. So if you want to take your boy Penny Hart here, I'm fine with it in round 5.
No, I'm okay with it. If there's a chance he's available, we can look at it, but I want to be responsible. I think that we need to shore up the running back position. I understand that probably it's going to be the combination of Kerryon Johnson and Zach Zenner if they improve and revamp that offensive line. I think they were impressed with what Zach Zenner has been able to do, his resiliency, his toughness. Now, Theo Riddick is the wild card. Will he make the roster? What will his contribution be? Because he's a guy that every year, when we start talking about the Lions, is always in the mix and he contributes, but it doesn't seem like he ever moves up the depth chart. So I'm all for creating some competition in that room, and I'm really happy the Lions in free agency did not get Adrian Peterson. I'm happy they didn't get Mark Ingram. I think as a backup, I think you can go with a core group of young running backs to make that group better, and I'm all for drafting the best running back available to challenge and to compete in that room.
So here are the two guys I'm looking at, because there's tons of big names, if you're a college football fan, still available. The number 1 rated running back right now on the board, and he's the 117th overall pick, and we're picking 146, so there's value. Rodney Anderson in Oklahoma, we forget how good he was 2 years ago. Now he's coming off an ACL, which is why he's lasted this long, because if he had been healthy last year, he might have been the number 1 running back in this draft ahead of Josh Jacobs at Alabama. So there's 2 schools of thought here. One, take Rodney Anderson, because this isn't a glaring need, because you do have Kerryon and Zenner. You don't need him right away, and you're getting excellent value for a 1st or 2nd round talent in the 5th round. But there's another player I love, and I think he's the perfect complement to Kerryon Johnson, and that is Benny Snell at Kentucky. Because this is a guy that every week in the toughest conference in the country, when they had no passing game whatsoever, they had no quarterback whatsoever. Everybody knew he was coming. And every week, all he did was produce. I like running backs that showed they could produce in college. And the other thing I like about Benny Snell as well is he's more of a thumper. You know, Kerryon is more of your classic tailback, your glider, get me to the corner kind of a guy. Benny Snell is the guy you give the ball to on 3rd and 3, and he's durable. So to me, I think it comes down to Rodney Anderson at Oklahoma, great value for a potential first-round talent who's coming off a knee, or Benny Snell, who's not nearly as athletically explosive, but is just an absolute blue-collar guy who did it against the best competition in college football. Where do you want to go?
You know, Steve, I definitely trust you. So give me Benny Snell, baby, and let's get some competition. I like it. I like complimentary running backs. I like that. You know what? Even though many Lions fans are skeptical that the Lions can execute their plan, if the plan is defense and a running game, that has been shown tried and true in the past to at least give you a chance for some success. I know some people, maybe even on this podcast, might call the Lions the lie-ins. But if they're going with running back and defense, give me the best available, and I'm down with what you said.
All right, so now we're into the 6th round where the Lions have 2 picks. All right, so you start looking at what are some of the best players available. You start thinking of, is this where we want to go and get a young quarterback to develop and have some insurance for Connor Cook? You know, a couple of local guys, Mike Weber from Detroit and Ohio State, still on the board. Karan Higdon from Michigan, still on the board, but we already drafted running back. Hunter Renfrow, hero of the Clemson Tigers, is a slot receiver, is still on the board. But you know what? You have put this off long enough. You've got a guy. I say now is the time you go and get your guy, Penny Hart out of Georgia State. You good with that?
Penny Hart's available. That's awesome. In this version, where did Bryce Love go?
Bryce Love is still on the board.
Oh man, that's nice. I targeted him as well. I think he's got.
But here's my issue with. Here's why I didn't give you Bryce Love as an option. He's just not durable.
Right, exactly. That's the big highlight that I put as a con, is that he's not durable at 5'10", 202 pounds, and that's why in my projections he's slotted to go in between the 3rd and the 5th round. But if my wide receiver is there and he's dipped, that's awesome. Let's get him.
So in the 6th round, the Lions have picked Penny Hart, and now we have the 6th round pick again. This is the 204th overall pick. And, you know, linebacker's not really strong in this draft, but I want to throw out the name of a player. The linebackers did not perform well in the Senior Bowl, in the practices. People always focus on the game. Nobody cares what goes on in the game. It's about what happens in the practices. But there was one linebacker at the Senior Bowl that showed he could actually cover somebody in space. And he's still on the board here. And I like, his name is Terrell Hanks, linebacker out of New Mexico State. He was literally the only linebacker in Mobile that showed he could cover out of the backfield. We know that's not Jared Davis's strong suit. We also know the Lions love to pick players that they saw at the Senior Bowl. So my recommendation here would be to go with Terrell Hanks, linebacker out of New Mexico State.
Awesome. I had linebacker as the targeted position with this pick, but maybe he's not available. I had targeted Joe Giles Harris, linebacker from Duke, 6'2", 240 pounds. He registered 81 tackles, 7 tackles for loss with 1 sack, and he's projected between the 5th and 7th round. The issue, the con that I wrote for him, is that he's coming off of an MCL injury in 2018, and I know the Lions sometimes disregard those type of things, but if he's available, that was the name I targeted, but I'm all for the linebacker, so anybody that we can get to provide depth, because the Detroit Lions are obviously going to be calling upon Jared Davis to continue to take a step. Now, everybody that talks about Jared Davis is talking about his leadership, that he's a gamer, that he wants to get better. But unfortunately, at this point in time, with Jared Davis, he's got to show it on the field. You can talk about all the intangibles all you want, and that'll look good and that'll garner good press. But if you go on the field and you blow all those tackles and you blow coverages and you can't stop the running backs and you can't be the leader, then you can't play linebacker in the NFL. So Jared Davis is going to be interesting, and we'll see what, in addition to another linebacker, will do to that room. But we need to shore up that linebacker position if this team's going to get better.
I am impressed see, as a college football guy, I know who those guys are, but I'm impressed you pulled out Joe Giles Harris like that. Now, he's gone, but I'm impressed that you had that guy. You did your homework, brother. That is impressive. So with Joe Giles Harris off the board, the Lions with the 204th pick in the 6th round will take the only linebacker that didn't get depantsed at the Senior Bowl, Terrell Hanks, linebacker, New Mexico State. So we are now down to the Lions' final pick in the draft, I believe. Pick number 224. No, the Lions have 2 picks in the 7th round. So pick number 224. So this is where I would start looking at who are the young quarterbacks to develop. I think the best potential option on the board, and I think on actual draft day, he will be gone long before this. All right. But Ryan Finley at North Carolina State played in a pro-style offense, a little bit older because he comes out of minor league baseball as well, but he's used to playing under center, used to diagnosing coverages alongside what you typically see in the NFL. You've got him on the board. Clayton Thorson at Northwestern is on the board. Trace McSorley at Penn State, who I don't think has much of a chance as a quarterback in the NFL, on the board. You have David Blau, if you're a Big Ten fan, you know from him at Purdue. So my suggestion would be we draft Ryan Finley here, or we just take a look at who might be the best available overall player. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, who is the overall best player? But I have in line with Ryan Finley. I'm okay with that. Later in the draft, if that's where they want to go, in the 7th round, you look at players that have to really razzle dazzle. Most likely will be cut, but you never know. You might get a guy that could be a solid addition to the practice squad. So I'm okay with Ryan Finley. But who is the best available?
So here's where the Draft Network has best player available right now. Tyree Brady, wide receiver, Marshall. Your boy Bryce Love at Stanford is still on the board. James Williams, running back, Washington State. Darwin Thompson, running back, Utah State. Anthony Ratliff-Williams, wide receiver, North Carolina. Dexter Williams, running back, Notre Dame. Jalen Hurd, wide receiver, Baylor. Jamal Custis, wide receiver, Syracuse. Bruce Anderson, running back, North Dakota State. Lil Jordan Humphrey, wide receiver, Texas. Those are a few of the players. Austin Bryant, defensive end, Clemson. Ryan Finley is one of the best available players. So those are some of the names that are listed amongst the best available right now. That would be the most familiar probably to you, I, and our audience. What do you think?
Yeah, let's go with Ryan Finley. I'm okay with that.
All right. So the Lions in the 7th round will find a young quarterback to develop. Ryan Finley at NC State will be the 224th pick Detroit will make. And this now brings us to the last pick the Lions have in this draft. And let me ask you, do you have a sleeper, someone else you had your eye on that you think is it possible they might still be there, that we take a shot at them?
Yeah, in the late rounds, obviously there's sleepers. You're taking chances on players who have maybe just one real good skill. So at that spot, I had targeted with the last pick, Darius Slayton, wide receiver from Auburn at 6'1", 190 pounds. In 2018, had 35 receptions, 670 yards, 5 touchdowns. I think the Lions have had a decent look at rookie gems at the receiver position. Even as last year, they got Brandon Powell, who looks like a guy that might be a competitive guy that prior to the signing of Amendola, I thought might have been given a chance because when Golden Tate was traded, the offense was decimated, but he stepped up. He made plays, and he helped out. He helped the cause as much as he could. So the sleeper I wrote down was Darius Slayton, but I'm open to any position best available. Obviously, looking at linebacker, corner, secondary, even on the offensive line. A flyer is a flyer, and this pick, obviously, any pick is important to the Lions, but this pick, I'm okay with taking a chance on any flyer with talent.
I'm again impressed you pulled him out, but he's gone. He's off the board. You know what? Let's go. It's even though we filled it at the top of the draft and we signed Trey Flowers, this was a highly productive college player that if you could find a place for him, even as a role-playing guy, how about Austin Bryant, defensive end at Clemson, for our last pick in the draft?
Hey, you say Clemson, I'm listening. What's the stats on him?
All right, so Austin Bryant of Clemson, Clemson defensive end, is the Lions' last pick in the 7th round. So to recap, here's who the Lions selected in our mock draft. And again, we were picking as if we thought we kind of the way the Lions might think. All right, so The Lions selected Montez Sweat, Mississippi State, in the first round. Elgton Jenkins, interior offensive line from Mississippi State, in round 2. David Long, corner of Michigan, in round 3. Caleb Wilson, tight end, UCLA, in round 4. Benny Snell, running back, Kentucky, round 5. Penny Hart, wide receiver, Georgia State, in round 6. Terrell Hanks, linebacker, New Mexico State, in round 6. Ryan Finley, quarterback, NC State, in round 7. Austin Bryant, edge rusher, Clemson, in round 7. Compare that now with what they've done in free agency. Your view on how improved of a team you think this could be next season?
Prior to free agency and now drafting, I thought the Lions were going to be around a 7 to 9 win team. Now, if everything shakes out correctly and the Lions gel and they play well, I think we've now moved up to maybe 9 to 10 wins as an expectation, because I do think that the room for growth under Matt Patricia, you did see it. You saw sparks. What was lacking last year was consistency. Obviously, when you make a move to, pull the trigger and get rid of Golden Tate, I do think that the Lions basically gave up on the season. But they are trying to, in that room, set a standard. They're trying to bring in guys that will buy in and really work hard. And you got to remember, they did step up on a couple of occasions in terms of big game performances versus the likes of the Rams and the Patriots. Now, they didn't get the victory at times, but you got to remember that in the Super Bowl, after a great defensive performance, they came out, the Patriots that is, and said, we looked at film from the Lions, what they did to the Rams. So this, we have to embrace, us Lions fans have to embrace this team now being a team that wants to win 16-13. And I know we're now entering into an offensive league, and the big source of concern and stress for many of us is going to be, how the hell are the Lions going to score points? Are they going to try and actually run the ball that many times? Are they going to dink and dunk it effectively all the way down the field for an entire season? That's going to keep us all up at night. But I do think that with an improved defense that will pressure the quarterback, get turnovers, the continued growth of Darius Slay, I do think the additions are good enough to maybe get us to the point where we can face the ultimate disappointment with like a 9-7, 10-6 year, but not winning the division.
That's really well said. And I think something else to keep in mind, too. Number one, Kyler Murray is going to be the number 1 pick in the draft. Yeah. It's just a matter of whether the Arizona Cardinals pick him or somebody else does. Once that happens, if let's say the Giants aren't the team that trades up to get Kyler Murray at number 1, or the Cardinals pick him at number 1, that other team, that other next team that thinks they need a quarterback, they're going to panic, especially if they have like the 6th pick, and they're going to be like, Dwayne Haskins is not going to survive here, because if this scenario actually happened and Dwayne Haskins was on the board at number 8, I guarantee you what the Lions would do is trade down right away. And then you're looking at drafting a player who I think is one of the 10 best players in the whole draft. And that's Garrett Bradbury, the offensive lineman from NC State. He won the Remington Award last year. He was dominant at the Senior Bowl, and he fills a massive need for Detroit in the interior of the offensive line that I could see the Lions trading down and letting someone come up and get Dwayne Haskins. But I think we're trending towards the top 2 picks in the draft, both being quarterbacks, like it typically is. And then you're talking about several players could slide down in that scenario. And then before we go, for people that are curious, some players that have been linked to the Lions in a lot of other mock drafts, and or guys that are local. Where did they go? Devin Bush of Michigan went 11th. We mentioned that Rashawn Gary of Michigan went number 5. I'll be fascinated to see what kind of pro he is, because his college production just wasn't there. In this draft, the lineman I just mentioned that I could see the Lions trading down and going for later, Garrett Bradbury, he went 18th to the Vikings. A couple of players that have been mocked to the Lions a lot, Greedy Williams of LSU, the corner, went 20th to the Steelers. Cleveland Farrell, the edge rusher for Clemson, he went 21st to the Seahawks. And then TJ Hawkinson, the outstanding tight end of Iowa, lasted all the way to the 30th pick in this simulation to the Green Bay Packers. So those are some guys that have often been mocked to Detroit and where they ended up in the draft when we didn't pick them.
Okay, Steve, before we get out of here, you can follow Steve Deace at Michigan Podcast. He does a great podcast dedicated to all things Michigan. Comes out every Tuesday via YouTube, via his website, via our platform at DetroitSportsPodcast.com. Definitely give Steve a follow at Michigan Podcast. Give me one reason for hope for the Lions, one reason for absolute fear and terror being a Lions fan.
Well, the second thing is the easiest to answer. They're the Lions. They have one playoff win in 62 years. The Cleveland Browns, who didn't have a team for 10 years, has 8 since 1957. Okay, so I mean that's one reason. But here's where I think there's I believe we have a GM for the first time since I've been a fan, and this is my 36th year as a fan. I believe the Lions have a GM who has a plan. Now, whether he can execute it, whether he'll choose the right people or not, but the way they are building the team from the inside out, the way that they did not, go totally ape the first 2 years, they did go aggressive when they had a glaring need for Marvin Jones. They went aggressive when they had a glaring need for Rick Wagner. But there's a plan there that demonstrates a lack of panic. And then what I liked about what they did this year is now's the time to make your move in year 3. Now you get aggressive. And what I love about the guys they've signed in free agency, and the dumbest argument, well, they overpaid for these guys. Everybody, you can't overpay for a player in the NFL unless it's a quarterback. The only overpaid player on the Lions is Matt Stafford. Here's why. The salary cap has gone up 56% since 2011 alone. In 1994, the salary cap debuted. It was $36 million. This year, it's $188. You can't overpay. Most of these contracts are backloaded. So let's look at Trey Flowers. Well, he's not worth $17 million, which is what the tender for a franchise player is. Okay, so you wanted the Lions to bid $12 million for one of the top 10 defensive ends in the NFL, and then he goes somewhere else for $17 million. You're like, well, why didn't they get him? It's a stupid argument, okay? Number one. What I like about this, though, you look at where these 4 guys are coming from. Amendola, former Patriot. Flowers, former Patriot. You look at Coleman from the Seahawks. Jesse James from the Steelers. These are guys from 4 organizations where we're not going to have guys anonymously saying to Bleacher Report, Matt Patricia thinks he's Bill Belichick and he hasn't won anything, to which I would say, dude, you play for the Lions. You've never won anything. He's got 4 rings. What the hell's your issue? Okay? So these are guys that come from organizations where there's a culture and an expectation of work and winning. So it's not just that they fill needs. It's not just that they're productive players, but it's also that they're adding to the culture that the Lions are finally trying to build. I thought Jim Caldwell, it's a 2-tiered process. I thought Jim Caldwell did a really good job of bringing a level of professionalism here. And you saw that the Lions pulled out a lot of games in the fourth quarter when he was the coach here that most of my life they would have been out of by the third quarter. Okay. So I gave him credit for that. There was a certain level of professionalism. We didn't have off the field problems and the ups and downs, and that was great. But now you have to develop a culture of winning. And, Patricia comes from the ultimate culture of winning. And so I like the fact that they're bringing in more guys from winning cultures. Jesse James, if they had the same tight end with the same numbers from Tampa Bay, I wouldn't be as big of a fan. All right. But I like the fact we're bringing in guys that know what it takes to win and they're accustomed to it. There's an added value there, if you ask me.
I've enjoyed, running this draft through the Draft Network with Steve Deace. Let's maybe do it again just ahead of the draft, version 2.0. I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed the draft banter. Follow Steve Deace on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. Follow the network at Detroit Podcast. If you've liked or disliked anything that you've heard that we've drafted or our strategy, definitely feel free. Leave us a comment. We'll definitely engage with you. Or feel free, leave a voicemail, 248-579-8686. I look forward to hearing your guys' reaction on our DSP mock draft through the Draft Network version 1.0. Thanks, Steve.
Take care.